All right. Welcome, everybody, to episode 7 of SFF Addicts, where we're talking about food in fantasy. I'm very pleased today to be joined by 4 guests. Andrea Stewart. She's the author of The Bone Shard Daughter and the soon-to-be-released The Bone Shard Emperor, books 1 and 2 in her Drowning Empire trilogy. When her admittedly ambitious dreams of becoming a dragon slayer didn't pan out, she instead turned to writing books. And now she's a mother, a published author, and she's here to chat with us about food. Happy to have you here, Andrea.
Happy to be here.
And next we have Krystle Matar. She's the author of The Legacy of the Brightwash, her debut and book 1 in the Tainted Dominion series, as well as a finalist in the SPFBO 7 competition. She's also a parent and a farmer, both of which heavily involve food and a lot of patience. Thanks for taking part, Krystle.
Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, happy to have you here. And also joining us is Angela Boord. She's the author of Fortune's Fool and Dragon Meat, as well as many other books. And she's been writing since she was 11, although she took a slight detour for about a decade or so. Now she's publishing novels and is a mom to 9 kids, ranging from 4 to 24 years old. And I can't even begin to imagine how much food prep and cooking she has to do every day. But good on you, Angela, and welcome to the panel.
Thanks. Hi.
And finally, there's FanFiAddict's Tom Harnett. He's the blog's resident beard, a book reviewer, and a former chef turned foodie. I'm glad you could join us, Tom. How are you, my friend?
Glad to be here, and I left all the food in my beard just for this.
Just little crumbs here and there. Just a little crumbs for all the birds to pick out.
It's a soup strainer, isn't it?
I'll save that one for later.
Just like a napkin, you know. So we'll start off getting everybody to tell us a bit about themselves. Krystle, why don't you start? How food became a part of your life and what your culinary journey into adulthood has been like.
Okay, I can start. I guess I've always had some health problems that were exacerbated by food. And so as I came into adulthood, I just kind of got fed up with all the problems all the time. And then when I had children, they had different problems, of course. So that took a lot of experimenting and learning and cooking just to make sure that everyone was fed and reasonably healthy. And it's a lot of work, but I had to find a way to make it fun because we need to eat like every day. And often we all have different needs. So it just trying to figure out how to make us enjoy these things without feeling like we're missing out made me experiment with a lot of different things, different inspirations, different ideas, and it's worth it to put the time in to make it fun. So that takes up a lot of my day, and then also I write. So
I think a lot of us here will have the same perspective of a lot of time spent cooking and prepping food and a lot of time writing as well. Well, Andrea, why don't we get into you? What has your culinary journey been like, and how did food become an important or integral part of your life?
Well, it's always been a really important part of my life. My mom does a lot of cooking. She actually studied chemistry in college, and she uses a lot of that when she's cooking. And she involved us from a very young age. So I learned how to cook when I was pretty young. And she's one of those people that doesn't do like recipes a lot. So I had to just kind of like be in the kitchen and like taking notes, like what she was doing and like when she was doing it and why. And just as I grew older, I didn't really appreciate, I think, how much she cooked and how good her cooking was until I went to college and I was eating dorm food. And I'm like, what is this? Terrible. And that's like when I realized that, like, oh my God, my mom's like an amazing cook, and anything else that I am encountering like this food at college is just going to be terrible. So that definitely strengthened my need to like learn how to do that and replicate it. So I basically did like a deep dive on cooking from there on out.
and dorm room food is trash. No, I'm just kidding. Sometimes it's good.
It was to me. Our dorm allegedly had the best food, but it was not very good.
Oh man. And what about you, Angela? Angela, what about you?
Well, I guess mine started early. So until I was about 4-ish, my dad and I lived with my grandparents, and my grandpa he was a gardener. And so he had 2 really big gardens. He grew a lot of food. They froze it. My grandma froze it. And my grandma cooked. We lived in Ohio, but my grandma was from West Virginia. And so she cooked a lot of Southern food, which I didn't realize was Southern food until we moved south when I was like 6. So it was like fried green tomatoes and, pinto beans and cornbread, and then all the stuff from the garden, which was just fresh. Like you just go out and eat strawberries or corn on the cob or whatever. And then my dad was not quite that way. He was a mechanic. He liked airplanes and stuff. So he tried to grow a garden for a few years, and that didn't happen. So when I grew up, I was really interested in cooking. I think because it's creative as well, and I would experiment with stuff. And I would cook for my sisters and me from about the age of 13. I was putting together dinners, but I am also not the kind of person who follows a recipe very well. And so they got a lot of interesting dinners for a while. But when I got my first apartment, and I went out and I bought my first cookbook, which was like on the dollar table. It was like $1. It was the Moosewood Sundays cookbook, which is old, really old now. But and it was on Sundays. It was a vegetarian cookbook, which was totally different than. I'm not vegetarian, but I like to explore different kinds of foods and different ways of cooking. And that was sort of like my launch into adult cooking, like that I could do just for me, because, nobody was, my little sister wasn't going to go, ew, I don't want to eat that. So then I had kids, and now it's like, yeah, so but that was kind of how I started and where it came from. And as I got older, I have a lot of food sensitivities that I've discovered along the way, but that's always been kind of a challenge to figure out like how to deal with that and still eat really well, like taste wise, because it seems like a lot of things like that are gluten-free, it's like they're a science experiment. They're not really about being food. And so I guess that's kind of where I am now.
It's like, how can I figure out how to replace this flour with like all the other flours?
Yeah.
And I'll get into my food experience afterwards, which does involve some of this gluten sensitivity things. But Tom, if you could delve a little bit into your history with food.
I mean, I started quite late. I found I was 19 and living in a student house, and it was the first time I'd ever had to feed myself to survive. And I quickly got fed up with all the packet noodles that you normally eat as a student. I thought, well, let's have a go at making something a bit more interesting. And I just found it was such a good way, cooking at the end of the day, to unwind and relax. And I really enjoy feeding people. I like sharing that creativity with them. And that's why I ultimately got my degree in English and American Studies and went straight to work as a chef, as you do. So I had all the crippling debt and I had the really stressful job. Yay! But it was brilliant. I worked at a really cool cafe restaurant. It was a really cool left-wing place, and it had its own allotment. So we grew our own vegetables, herbs that we could use for the cooking. And I learned so much, cooking from scratch with actual raw ingredients, that I just fell in love with it. And it's many, many years later, and I still get that same satisfaction. I like to learn more about other cultures. If I go to a different country, the first thing I do is see what the local restaurants have to offer. it's just a really, really special thing for me.
Yeah, I'm in a similar boat to you, Tom. I mean, growing up, my mom was always into cooking. My dad is not capable, or just like never put the attention into it. And whenever my mom would leave for the evening and she would put the food in my dad's hands, it would always be something like baked beans on toast, or just something like as close to being ready to eat as possible. Because I remember distinctly one time where he made spaghetti, but he put way too much salt into the noodles while they were boiling. And so all of us started to eat it, and it's like I almost threw up because it was just so salty. And then my dad was just like, never again. And he just started throwing it all in the garbage. But my mom was always really invested in cooking, and she loved experimenting. Much like you, Angela, she was always like trying out new things. Although she has a little container where she puts all of her handwritten recipes in there. And if she figured out a better way to do it, she would throw out the old one and then put the new. It's like all index cards kind of thing. And she just started getting really into baking. And so it's like, as I grew up, my mom would always have like, here's my new baking experiment every week, which explains why I got a bit chubby when I was like 10 to 14 years old. But that aside. But once I left and went to university, like you, Andrea, tried the food at my dorm, and it was just like, this is whatever. And then after first year, started living with friends, and then in Vancouver where I studied, and then eventually I lived in Berlin and Germany. Food was always this communal thing that would bring people together. I love cooking for other people, like you, Tom. I love cooking with people, just like throw on some good music, roll up a joint, and then just like cook and smoke. And then afterwards, everybody's hungry, and then we all eat together, and it's an amazing time. And now that I live in Ecuador, I have the benefit of being in a place where the access to really good food all year round is insane. And so here on the equator, it's basically guaranteed that all year round you can find really good quality local produce, which is not something that you can say for a lot of parts of the world. And here, it doesn't really matter too much about your economic status. There's always good access to good food if you take a little bit of time and seek it out. Go to some local markets, meet some farmers, that kind of thing. And now that I have a son, it's just like I'm cooking every day for him and my wife, since I'm a stay-at-home dad. We make everything for my son homemade as much as we can. So food, I guess, throughout my life has always been, whether it's my connection to my mom, my connection to my friends, or now my connection to my wife and child, it's always been about like connective tissue, And some people say that like alcohol is the social lubricant, and for me, it's like, no, screw that. Like food is the ultimate social lubricant. Yeah. And I think it's really interesting that we're going to be exploring food from the perspective of fantasy. So we'll start with Andrea. How does your relationship with food, how it developed over the course of your life, translate to like the books that you read? And was there any book in particular or any memory of food that stood out to you while you were reading growing up?
I would say like with the Pern books, like I remember some of the food that they had in there, and they always had like claw, which was like their, I think it was called that. It was just like their coffee kind of thing. And I ended up buying like their, like the whole like world compendium kind of guide thing that goes with that. And it had like recipes in there. So I remember I tried out like a couple of the recipes. I was so fascinated with that. So that was like where it kind of started for me, where I was like, oh, like there's this really great connection with like food and literature. And I like want to know what the people in this different world are eating and drinking, and like, what does it taste like? So that was kind of where it started for me.
Yeah. And what about you, Krystle?
My earliest food and books memory is Redwall, and I don't remember anything about those books anymore. It's been well over 20 years. but I remember the feasts in those books, the dandelion cordial and the everything, just everything. And I just remember being so fascinated by how it translated for the main characters are mice and cute little forest animals, and they just kind of took everything that you know about food and just shifted it ever so slightly so it made sense for them as animals. So then after that, I noticed when the effort was not put into a book and the food was boring and uninteresting. So that Redwall ruined me or spoiled me.
Redwall was my first introduction as well. And it's like,
Yes.
shout out to Brian Jacques, because his writing is so good. And it's like the anthropomorphization of animals is not easy to do. But like you say, Krystle, he had this knack for twisting familiar, I would call it like, typical North American or British food, but twisting it in such a way where it's like, okay, this totally makes sense for the fact that there's like mice
for the squirrel
and squirrels and badgers and bunnies eating this stuff, and it had like this unique perspective of like grounding you in this world. I think like food is what made Redwall approachable for me.
Yes.
Despite the fact that I love animals, it was like, cool, they're eating food that I eat, or it's like,
it was that bridge between what we would feel comfortable in, but he bridged it over to something that's totally new because it's animals. And then it's like a crash course in food and fantasy 101. Like, how do you take the familiar and make it amazing? And then vice versa, how do you make the amazing and make it familiar? So that I definitely agree with you there.
Yeah, I don't have any copies of Redwall anymore, but I'm like already looking on different websites. Like, can I buy like the whole series so I could just like read it to my son, with the hopes that he won't hate it. And I just bought like 20 books for nothing.
Well, when they're little,
Angela, what about you?
When they're little, you can read out loud to them and then they're a captive audience.
Exactly. And they have no choice what I read to them.
Yeah,
exactly.
Right, exactly.
I have to say, Clooney the Scourge from Redwall is still my favorite literary baddie.
So good.
Ever.
He's an awesome villain.
Such an awesome character.
And Angela, what about you? What are some of your earliest memories of food and fiction?
Well, I've been thinking about that, and I'm not sure I can pick anything out, but I know that I would. I know I would always hone in on any descriptions of food, like how in like a lot of children's books are. I don't even know. I can't even pick one out now, and I've read a lot since then to my kids. So I like the Redwall books. We read a whole bunch of those and had them on audio, and Brian Jacques narrates them, which is amazing. And then we got the Redwall cookbook and we cooked some of the recipes, and that was really cool. But for me, cause like, it was like, it's just the little descriptions of pantries, and when they have a dinner and everybody gets the dishes out and then they have to wash the dishes and then they put it, it's like you're playing with a dollhouse or something. And it's just like, I just kind of like that. Those little details of domestic life, I guess. It made it feel so orderly. So it could be like all the fantastic stuff is happening around the characters, like whatever characters you're talking about, but they still have to eat. They had to sit down and eat. And there's I can't remember what that book. There's a picture book. It's about mice. I can't remember the name of it now, but the description, and it's incredibly illustrated, and the descriptions of the pantries, I could just sit there and read them all day. So, I'm just that sort of person.
You're just dreaming about pantries.
I like pantries. I mean, my pantry doesn't look like that, but you can write, I could read about people's pickle jars, like, for hours, but mine doesn't look like that.
And Tom, do you dream about pantries as well?
I was just going to say, the Pickle Jar Chronicles sounds like the next master of fantasy.
Well, Tom, do you have No, go
sorry,
ahead. Do you have any like everybody else? Do you have any memories of food and fiction that really stand out to you?
I have quite a few, so it's hard to pinpoint. But my very earliest memory of food in fiction was a book about the three bears my mum read to me. And in this book, the porridge becomes sentient, turns into a porridge monster. And I think I was 3, and I was terrified. I had nightmares about this porridge monster. So, oh my God, this is so unsuitable for children. Gosh. So that sort of put me off food for a while, I think. But when I got a bit older, I started reading for myself. I was really hooked on anything by an author called Philip Ridley, and he wrote a series of urban fantasy style books. So sort of everyday life in London in horrible concrete high rises. But he'd always feature food really prominently. So one book is called Scribble Boy. One of the side characters, she's a doctor of ice cream. And, through something simple like pinching your tongue between her fingers, she can work out how to make the perfect ice cream sundae for you. There's a doctor of pizza in that book as well. And I just remember, reading this as a kid and thinking, wow, how the hell can they tell like what ice cream I'd like just by doing this? And it was just a really magical thing to read. And the other one was Casper and the Glitter, where the main character, Casper, makes a banoffee pie and he puts marmalade on the top. And the way this author writes, it's so delicious and magical and wondrous, where it just made me crave banoffee pie. And has such a huge hook on the plot as well that you think, wow, this is a really powerful thing to discuss in any books. And then, as I got older and beardier, you notice all the Feast of Red War. Game of Thrones always jumped out to me as well as making me feel hungry with almost every page. So, yeah, there's too many books to count, and I'm pretty sure I can pull any book off the bookshelf here and find something that's going to make me want to raid the fridge.
I'm just imagining you as a young lad. I'm just imagining you as a young lad reading Redwall, and you already have a beard. It's just like, I can't take away the image of the beard. I can't like separate you two at this point.
I think I just grew around the beard. The beard was always there. It just sprouted a human.
The eternal beard.
Beard before human. Now that we've all gotten older and started to develop families and approaching food in a new way, we'll start with you, Andrea. How has your relationship with food changed since having kids?
It's a lot more hectic. I don't know that it's changed that much. It's changed in the sense that now that she's like, fully eating solids, I'm like, oh crap, I better make sure she's got a balanced diet. So I get up early and, make her really elaborate breakfasts and lunches and dinners. So I don't know how that's going to hold out for kid number 2. But to me, it's like I want her to have that, like what I have when I was growing up, just like really great food, like really fresh ingredients, which is a little bit hard though, because my mom was a full-time mom and didn't have a job outside of that, and I do. So I'm like, get up at 5, right? So I still do the same things that I do. I just kind of have to make more time for it, in the sense that I kind of have to squeeze it in. Whereas before I would be like, spending a bunch of time at the grocery store, like, what do I want to have for dinner tonight? Or like, what do I want to cook this week? And now it's got to be a lot more efficient. But I still do like to kind of still like explore different flavors and try new recipes. I just have to plan it a little better.
No, I'm exactly the same way. My wife is the kind of person that's like, oh, I'm going to go grocery shopping. And she comes back like 2 hours later. I'm like, no, I'm making that list before I leave home, and I'm there like 45 minutes and I'm out. I'm not exploring. I know exactly where I want to go. Krystle, what's your perspective on food and cooking now that you have a family?
I think my perspective really shifted after I was a family or after I had a family, because then I was the provider. And I can kind of cut corners for myself without feeling guilty. But now I have these 4 small humans that need to eat every day. And so it's like, there's just this intense awareness of I want to provide them with the skills to do this for themselves, but also they've got to survive long enough to do it for themselves. So it's just like, there's a lot of joy in it, but there's also a lot of pressure. Like these people eat several times a day. It's really inconsiderate of them. So it's just like a balancing act between how much energy do I have today for this, and how much passion do I have today? And it's not always the same level, but in the end, they really enjoy food, so that makes it easier. At least they're not picky eaters, so it's like if I need to just throw something at them, then they're good. They got me covered. I don't know how I would survive a picky
that's so
eater
helpful
at this point. Yeah, it makes a big difference.
I've dreaded that with my son. Yeah, because there was times where it's like he doesn't want anything, but now I feed him stuff, and it's pretty much like, I don't know why he's so methodical with his food. He'll just like, oh, this is something I really like tomatoes. He's obsessed with tomatoes. So he just like picks up his tomato one by one and just pops in his mouth, and he finishes every tomato before going on to his meat or whatever else we've given him. So I'm just like, this is crazy, but he's just like, oh, there it is.
I know
just
it feels crazy in the moment, but I'm telling you, this is the most delightful age, just watching them go through that journey all by themselves, and like, enjoy it. Soon he'll be big and he'll have opinions out loud at you. It'll be different.
And he'll eat a lot.
Yeah.
And,
well,
Krystle, I wanted to ask you something specific, because you live on a farm.
Okay.
You're growing a lot of your own food, but how does your personal connection to the land and the food you eat sort of like influence you in your daily life?
Yeah, that was a journey all by itself, just like becoming intensely aware of what our land already has. In North America, we kind of have like a tunnel vision about what we like. We like the tomatoes, we like cucumbers, we like, like all the stuff that you can find in the grocery store. And we don't think as much about what we have. So going through the forest and finding things that are edible, and, by the creek, it was really, almost a spiritual journey, going through shifting your mind from the grocery store and what's easily marketable to what we have in Ontario. And my husband got a little bit fired up about trying to get some stuff that used to be Indigenous to the area, but got wiped out because of people. So he's trying to grow some pawpaw trees, which I'm told the fruit that they make tastes like custard. You've had them?
Yeah.
Andrea?
Yeah.
Have you had them?
They're good.
Oh, Angela, sorry.
I have. I have, because they grow in like the Midwest and stuff. Yeah, they're good. We tried to grow them when we lived in upstate New York, but the trees died. So we couldn't get them to take. But yeah, pawpaws are neat. They like grow in the woods and like Missouri. We used to live in Missouri too. So.
He found one nursery that we can get from that grows them. So that'll be his next journey, is just kind of, and then also just being aware of what has survived. And on top of that, this area was a farm for many hundreds of years, and we found in the forest what clearly used to be somebody's orchard, because there's a little stand of apple trees, and bordering that there's a little stand of gooseberries, and it's just like, but it's melded into the forest. So yeah, the land has had a lot to give us, and we just have to look for it. And it's been really cool. It's kind of helped me fall in love with food again. Yeah.
Yeah. Now my wife and I live in a house where we have a backyard, and I mean, we don't have everything. We're sort of like in the early stages of planning where we want to put stuff, but we have a fig tree, we have a mandarin tree. There's sort of like these Andean blackberries that look a bit more like raspberries, but they're super delicious. So I'll just take my son out in the backyard and we'll just like pluck those off, and I'll pop them in his mouth, and he loves them. So for me, it's like, it's really nice to be able to have that connection of like, I'm just going to go into my backyard and get these ingredients, If I'm making a soup, I'll need parsley, but I have parsley in the backyard, so I'll just go grab a stalk and I'm good to go. Angela, I'm really curious. You have 9 kids, and I'm just like bewildered by that fact.
Well, I didn't have them like all at once, so although I do have twins, so I was it 2 for 1 special.
Was it like Tom, where you had a beard before child kind of thing?
Yeah, I think that's what people think. It's just like boom.
So from your perspective, having so many kids and obviously spread out over so many years, you've had a lot of time to kind of get used to this parental perspective of food. So what has it been like for you?
Yeah, well, I don't know. I've kind of moved in stages a little bit, because when I first had kids, my mom was like, we ate packaged food, basically. It had to have a brand name on it, and that's what we ate. She didn't make a whole lot that was homemade, just some, and so when I had kids, that's what I did. I got the jar of spaghetti sauce. I like to cook like weird things, but not like kid food. So, but then I started to move out of that. I was like, you know what? I was like, but it doesn't take that much longer to make spaghetti sauce. And so as I had more kids and I started thinking about it, and I started, I read Michael Pollan's book, The Omnivore's Dilemma, and we started thinking about it. And then I grew up in the country, in the woods, and we were living in the suburbs, and I really wanted to get back to living in the country. And we decided we moved to upstate New York and had 15 acres and tried to grow our food, which did not go that well. Actually, I'm not a great gardener, but it was kind of fun. And I kept having, I had more kids, and the more kids that I had, like the more streamlined everything had to be, because it's like, you can't make different meals for everybody. Everybody has to eat the same thing, even if you don't like it. Like, you have to at least have a couple bites, because I try to make stuff that everybody will like, or that most people will like. And if you don't like this one thing, then another night I'll make something that you probably will like, and your brother might hate it. But, so I went through that stage. And then when I first gave up gluten and I was trying to figure out some health problems and stuff, I ended up making pretty much all of our food. And that was really hard. So when I started writing again, because it's like, when you're cooking for 11 people, it's like Thanksgiving every day. You don't make like that much food, but most people only cook for 11 people when they're having like a family get together. And that's like 3 meals a day for us. If I was like, so it got hard. And when my daughter was born, my youngest has Down syndrome, and she had to have heart surgery when she was 5.5 months old. The learning curve was really steep that first year. And we were focused very much on her and keeping her healthy. I nursed her for that year, which was great, because a lot of kids with Down syndrome can't nurse, but trying to just keep her, we couldn't let her get sick because of her heart problems. Once she had her heart surgery, she was good. But I started adding more convenience foods in, because I have 7 boys and 2 girls. And when the boys get older, they switch from being picky people who won't eat anything to people who walk in every 15 minutes and say, is there anything to eat? Why don't we have anything to eat? I'm hungry. And so I've had to just like bend on some of that and just put things in the freezer for them, because like, bags of pizza rolls or taquita. I mean, just so they have enough calories to like keep going so yeah, it's been kind of a journey.
I mean, with 9 kids, I can't even imagine, but I'm just gonna like take a moment to applaud you on your bravery as a parent.
Thank you. You gotta have time to adjust,
Yeah,
it's kind of like this. And I think like you learn to make things that do well being doubled and tripled. So you're not like making things that are fussy. It doesn't take it takes more prep time, but not more mental energy to make it. Like I have to allow more time to make a dinner than I would have if I was just making it for 4 people or whatever. But it's not, it's not necessarily hard.
And Tom, now that you're a dad and as a former chef, how are you approaching food now with your daughter?
I feel like more close to my chef days than I was before. I've discovered batch cooking, so everything I do, I think, well, can I get another 2-3 meals out of this? Maybe I need professional help because I'm getting carried away. I do batch cook porridge now, so I'll buy more bananas than I need, let them go off, I mush them up, stir them through the porridge. I'm like, great, that's us fed until lunchtime, and that'll keep us going for a whole week. But you never know when you're going to get called in because something has happened or mum needs help. So you can't really sit there and say, well, I'm going to make a wonderful beef Wellington tonight from scratch, including the pastry. You need something quick. You need to heat something up sometimes. So, yeah, like when I was a chef, I'd be making so many large batches of things and portioning them out. I do the exact same thing now. So it's actually come in really, really handy.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds like it. It's like, obviously you don't have a walk-in freezer. Who does? I mean, that's an
would
absurd.
help a lot.
That's the dream is to have a walk-in freezer.
Yeah.
But yeah, that the portioning thing is really key. It's like, having my wife and I make soup on Sunday in our pressure cooker, and we put that in the jars, pop that in the freezer, and it's like that's his lunch for the next week. So it's really convenient to be able to do that stuff, and it's time saving. Andrea, you were talking earlier about like just squeezing everything into the free time that you have. And since you are all writing, how do you and when did you decide to incorporate food into your fiction? And we'll start with you, Andrea.
I don't know how much of a conscious choice it was. I think to me, food is just a really important part of world building because not only are you thinking about like, well, what are they eating? Like, where are they getting their food? But also like, how are they eating it? Are they eating it together as a family? Or do they do like a formal dinner? Is somebody else cooking the food, or is it the family themselves that are cooking it? Does everybody pitch in? Like, those are the kind of things that I ask myself when I'm world building. Like, so in my Drowning Empire series, they're on a bunch of islands. So obviously, like, a lot of their food is coming from the ocean. They're eating a lot of seafood. So that was something that I had to take into consideration. And also just like regional differences too. Like, I think about that as well. Like, well, one island may specialize in this like spicy fish soup, and another one is like they got a lot more land and they like to make like goat curry, So it's like I think about that a lot, and then also I feel like it also brings like that sense of realism to the work. You're kind of delving into people's lives, and showing a little bit about how people live day to day, because we all have to eat and we all have to eat regularly. So showing people at meals, I think, kind of gives you a little bit more of a sense of how these people live.
Yeah, and it also gives you a sense of character too. It's like how these people are interacting at the dinner table. It tells you a lot about their personality, maybe the flaws or the positive aspects of the relationship. And Krystle, what about you? How did you go about incorporating food into the world building and the characters and legacy of the Brightwash?
Yeah, I'm the same as Andrea, where I can't pinpoint a specific moment where it was a decision. It was just always part of figuring out who I was dealing with on a continent scale as well as on the individual character scale. And I ended up kind of these characters would kind of teach me a little bit about who they were by how they treated food, just because I get my characters, some of them are on the poor side of town and some of them are not. Some of them are really well off. So watching the less fortunate characters interact around food told me so much about them. And then the richer side of town being kind of dismissive about whether or not it's something that they care about. And it was just some of the characters didn't eat often enough for Angela. So I had to kind of spend some time thinking about how
I was worried about him. He did that right.
Yeah. I got in trouble. But just thinking about how their access to food would change them as people, where some of the characters grew up hungry and some of the characters very much did not. And so that became a big part of just building the individual people as well as the world at large. Of I have a really big continent that they're playing on, and what is grown, who has what kind of agriculture and who doesn't have enough agriculture. So that was always fun to play with, and it just kind of seeped in naturally while I was building the layers.
Cool. And Angela, how has that been for you in terms of incorporating it into your world building or your characters?
Well, kind of the same as Andrea and Krystle, actually, because I think when I started out writing, I would put some food in, but I think I've started incorporating more food as I've gone along. And just because it's just it's such a good way of showing the differences in cultures and groups, and it's just such a basic world building tool. I mean, you can do so much with it. Like, you just take bread and cheese. It's like, well, what kind of bread? I mean, there's so many different varieties of bread around the world that it seems like you can say a lot about that. Like, what are they making it with, and do they have enough, and what is the weather like here, and how's that affecting things, and I don't know. It just seems like I kind of start with food, and I think I do more research on food than I do with anything else, which is sort of says something about me. But it will also, and then from there it can spark so many ideas about plot and character. Just like the tavern trope. They walk into a tavern and what's going on there, but it's just a little bit. They can get to know the characters can get to know each other. I write my Italian Empire series is set, and it's Renaissance inspired, and there's a lot of different cultures interacting there, and I thought I would probably be remiss not to write about food if I was writing about fake Italians. So they kind of, but it gives them the Italians are kind of the fake Italians. They kind of have a certain attitude toward their food and their regional dishes and stuff that also allows for some humor and some just getting to know people from the other characters. So it's fun. I like to write about food. It's fun. That's the other thing, I guess.
And you all brought up this aspect of food working itself into the, I guess, like the hierarchies and like the social, economic, and cultural structures of the worlds that you're creating. We'll jump to Andrea. I wanted to get you to elaborate a little bit on what you said earlier about, excuse me, the different islands and how they each have their own sort of unique dishes and different ingredients that are available to them. Can you build on that a little bit and kind of dig into how food acts as a window into other cultures?
Well, like, that's a difficult question. I think it's not just like, so it's not just like ingredients and what they have available to them, but also just how they would be serving and eating their food. So like in my second book, Lynn goes to some of the different islands and you get to see like they do eat their food a little bit differently. Like some of them do like a communal style where everybody is just eating from the same dishes, and some of them like everybody just gets their own plate. So she kind of has to decide like, oh, do I like bring a taste tester to this dinner or do I not? And like, what's appropriate? So I think like it kind of gives you a window into like what, like how things may have evolved on these different islands. Like in the one where they have like a communal dinner, like that may have been something that was done a long time ago before they had like a formal court, and they've just kind of carried it over into that. And they're just like different like expectations of how one carries themselves at dinner. Like there's a point where her captain of guard is with her and starts like tapping his staff because he's like nervous, and she's like, oh my God, that's incredibly rude. Like you never touch like a weapon at the dinner table. Like it's just like little things like that that kind of tell you like this is like, these are their like little customs and their cultures. And I feel like a lot of that is apparent in like the ritual of food and like how that's treated.
And Tom, since you've actually worked in a restaurant as a chef, you've served a lot of food to people, cooked a lot of food for people. Are there sort of like some anecdotes that you can bring in that your experiences as a chef, maybe it gave you a window into the lives of other people? You know, there's a lot of folks who are like, oh, I like my meat done this way. Other people have allergies, but then you can also just observe the dining room and sort of see how people eat or how they interact. You want to jump in on that?
Yeah, and what interests me when I read a book or when I do my own writing is, you know, it's almost free world building when you include food in any fiction. And for me, it's how it's prepared. So I love stories where I get to see behind the curtain. I get that window into the kitchen. So for my own writing, I'm writing a trilogy on Sky Pirates. So for me, it's really fun for them to dock at a port, stock up on as much food as possible, and then make all this salmagundis, as pirates tend to do. And the cook, the ship's cook of the Corsair, is the moodiest bastard ever. He's so much fun to write, but he's sort of every head chef I've worked with molded into one person. So it's a lot of fun to read and to write. And you know, I think the better books are ones that have that in mind. Is, you know, there's not just the characters who interact with the world and to find these dishes, these cuisines, but there's also the people who make it. So yeah, I always like to see where the food comes from when I read a book.
Yeah, I mean that's why Redwall, we brought that up earlier. That series always had smells coming from the kitchen, characters going into the kitchen, the banquet table being prepped, and Angela, we'll get your opinion on this because you brought it up earlier, how you like to see the sort of the intricate, I would call it like ritual of the table being set and all that kind of stuff. What is it about that really stands out to you? Like, what does it add to a book when you see stuff like that?
Well, I think that you can see, I don't know, for me, I think it's sort of grounding, like it gives you like the little kind of realistic details that make you believe in all the weird stuff going on. Like, and you can also see the people at work, like the characters, maybe they're doing something, well, like it may be humble in a way. And how do different characters approach that? What do different characters think about like this sort of preparation? I have a scene in Fortune's Fool where my main character, she's missing an arm, and she actually gets a job in the kitchens, and she has to, they're trying to get her to help, and they're like, well, what can you do? And she's trying to roll out dough to like make like ravioli kind of things. And it was just like, when you have to do that. And I actually, because my copy editor said, I'm not sure she can do that with one arm. And I said, I have to try. So I tried. I made like pizza, and I only used one hand. And it's really like the things that I thought were hard before I did that were not the things that were the hardest. Like the hardest is like holding on to the bowl and stirring, because you can't like hold something still. Like you have to use your, move your elbows around and stuff like that. So it's just like when you start thinking of little things and how they apply to your specific characters when you're writing, or like when you're reading, like, when you're reading Tolkien and the Hobbits and like Bilbo Baggins, and when he's like so upset, carefully with the plates and things like that, it just adds humanity into it. It's like it's just like, because we all recognize those little details of eating and making food, and who makes the food for us, who doesn't make the food for us, how do we get to eat it? Or like me, I guess I'm sensitive to that because I do make food for a lot of people every day. Like I beta read Krystle's book, and her main character, he never seemed to eat. I was like, but he needs to eat. So if I'm reading a book and I see a character and they're like, oh, especially if like, because sometimes they'll like, you'll have characters that go into places like taverns or kitchens or whatever, and then it'll be like, and then dinner, and then they'll get rushed out because something happens, and you're like, but when will they stop and eat? I'm just very concerned about these things. They matter to me.
I mean, it's the kind of thing that it creates a deeper sense of immersion within the world, because I think we all take for, not necessarily us, this is just a generalization, but a lot of people take food for granted, and the fact that it's like, yeah, we do have to eat in order to survive. And just because we're creating fictional worlds, it doesn't mean that someone doesn't eat a single time, and I imagine for you, Angela, it was kind of funny to see like, oh, there's like food mentioned all over the place in this world, and this one character, is he's just like fucking starving or something? Like, what's going on?
Yeah. Well, it was just like, I was so, and it was, Krystle's a really good writer. So it was just, I was so sympathizing. I was sympathizing so much with the character. I was like worried about him, it was stressing me out.
He drank a lot of whiskey, and I think that made it worse for her. This boy's always drinking whiskey and never eating.
Smoking cigarillos. Put some food in him, please.
Well, on that
people
notion,
were eating around him too,
On the notion of immersion, for Angela, that was immersion breaking for you, because you really picked up on it and you sympathized with his stomach.
Yeah.
Are there some clear examples, Krystle? We'll start with you. Are there clear examples of just like bad representations of food in fiction, like things that you've read and you're just like, oh my God.
I think the thing that bugs me personally is when the person who's writing about a particular thing clearly doesn't know whether it's an easy thing to do or not. Like stew, and bread for that matter, where we as a culture kind of take stew and bread for granted as like whatever easy things, but stew takes a really long time to make well, and tough meat takes a really long time. So it's not something like if you're traveling, you're going to throw it in the pot. Oh, and that bridges to the other one. Cooking over a campfire is not an easy thing to do. And it always bugs me when people just don't give it the thought that it deserves. And I'd rather somebody not write about food because it doesn't interest them and just lean into their strengths than for them to kind of toss us a really lame bone of stew over the campfire in half an hour. Like that's not, that bugs me. That always breaks my immersion of just, no. You're lucky if you've got your campfire hot enough in half an hour to eat. So traveling food is, I think, probably my biggest pet peeve in fantasy, where just some people just have no concept of how hard it is to eat in the wilderness, and that bugs me. So that's my that breaks my immersion.
Let alone
yeah.
I'm on the same page as you, but like let alone cooking the food, like prepping food in the wilderness is so fucking annoying. It's like, do you have a cutting board with you? Because if not, it's like, good luck, man. You're gonna be like cutting your hand trying to like cut something in half.
Yeah, or
go ahead, Krystle.
Or like trying to just cooking over the campfire and preparing food when you're tired at the end of traveling for all of your daylight hours is it's a big thing. So it bugs me. I'm very passionate about wilderness cooking.
And Andrea, wilderness cooking, goddamn. And Andrea, what about you? Are there some like misconceptions or tropes in fantasy regarding food that sort of just like bug you?
I would say like the pages long descriptions of food without anything to break it up. Like I love food and I love to read about food, but when it's not integrated into the story and I'm only reading about the food, I honestly kind of glaze over it. So I really like it to be like integrated into the story a little bit better.
It's like have a conversation while you're eating.
Yeah, where you're just like describing the feast, and
it's usually a feast too. It's like never like just like a family dinner or something. It's a feast.
It just starts reading like a menu.
And Tom, since you've come from the kitchen and now you're writing your own stuff, are there some like clear, blatant misconceptions about like how food is prepared or anything like that you've seen in fantasy that you just want to just see disappear forever?
I mean, maybe I'm spoiled because I've cooked for 4 years and I've always enjoyed cooking myself, trying new things. So I'm so bored of reading about trenches of stew. It seems to be a really, really easy crutch for any fantasy feast or story. Yeah, stew and bread. And you mentioned it earlier, there are different kinds of bread, there are different kinds of cheese. So what I really enjoyed in a book I read recently was Shadow of the Gods by John Gwynne. And, you were talking, Krystle, about camping in the wilderness and how hard it is to survive and to cook. And I think I think it was a Battle-Grim were trying to go in stealthily, so they said no fires. And the only thing they were eating was cold porridge and uncooked fish. And all the characters were so miserable. And that, to me, was a lot more powerful and provoking to read, because I'm like, oh, shit, these guys are taking this seriously. Whereas maybe another author might just have said, well, okay, yeah, have your trencher and your stew. Fine. We'll sit around the campfire.
No fires.
No fires today. But don't worry. We have a stew already. Yeah, we've been carrying it for like 10 miles.
It's magic stew.
I mean, it's so frustrating
I once did
sometimes.
a D&D campaign where there was a...
Go ahead, Tom.
No,
I was just going to say, it's so frustrating to see, like you said, Krystle, before, it's like, I would rather you just don't include anything about food if you are going to approach it in a lazy way or an incorrect way. Yeah. Because food is one of those things, I mean, I don't know about all of you, but it's so personal. It's very intimate. It's like, I'm, for the most part, preparing all of this stuff. I'm cooking it. I'm getting it ready. I'm plating it, et cetera, but then I'm putting it into my own body, you know? So it's a very intimate thing. And it's like, I know if something tastes like crap, you know? It's like, I know if something smells bad. I know if something's burning, all that. But food is not the kind of thing where you can just kind of be lazy about it. If you want to eat well. Obviously today we have so much processed stuff that you could eat lazily if you want to. But when it appears in fiction, for the most part, it's just it's so devastating when it's like this thing has just ruined an entire scene or it's ruined an entire chapter because you notice like this person is preparing something wrong or this person is really lazy in their research. You know, it's not that difficult to find a recipe for something online. Be like, how does it made? Just go look at the step-by-step instructions and you could probably do a better job if you just made it up and pulled it out of your ass, you know?
Yeah.
So
Angela,
when
a writer's...
No, go ahead, Krystle.
You can tell when a writer's not interested. And if they're not interested, I wish they just wouldn't bother because it just breaks the flow. It's okay if you don't like to write about food. Just leave us out of it, you know?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Angela, you want to jump in?
I just love to see someone tackle processed food in fantasy, you know, like dragon nugs or something like that. It'd be so cool.
We have freeze-dried dragon steaks. Enjoy.
Yeah.
Angela, you want to jump in on that?
I guess one of the things that always gets me is like the lack of, like, there are only a few vegetables and fruits in fantasy. Like the only fruits are apples, and like vegetables are like cabbages, potatoes, and turnips. Maybe like you maybe get a turnip.
Yeah.
So you know, but that goes back to the whole thing, like the bread and cheese and the stew. Like I don't mind if people write stew. Just tell me what's in it. You know, like it might be different. You might have a lamb stew, or you might have it. And if it's beef stew, where the heck are you getting the beef? You know, it's like, you know, especially if you're camping, like, where did you get the meat? How long did it take you to get the meat to put in there? Like, you know, and if also in fantasy, there's a lot of people who get taken on adventures that don't really know what they're doing. So that is a big deal too. You know, you're going on a trek in the wilderness and you have no idea what to eat, how to cook it, but you still eat stew. So it's kind of like that. Somehow it's magic stew.
It's like, I'm just imagining like Frodo and Sam, like 50 days into their journey. It's like, yeah, we got fresh meat. Don't worry about it. You know,
right. Just cooking, deal, you know?
Yeah.
But that affects the plot too, because you're missing like opportunities there, and you dump some people into a situation that they have no clue what to do. They have no idea what they're doing, and they have to survive. Like that's, you know, how do they react? How do they do that? You could make a big deal about that and raise the stakes instead of just kind of giving them a pass and going on.
Mm-hmm. And Andrea, in your series, it's like there's a lot of time spent on boats, like this whole maritime aspect to it. And of course, it's like they're eating like dried meat, you know, like salted meat, because what are you going to cook on a boat for the most part, you know?
Well, they can still cook. I mean, they still cooked on boats, and they do stop quite frequently. So they still do that. It's just not going to be as good as the food they get on land.
Yeah. And it's obviously a much more complicated process, you know. I'm just imagining like cooking while a boat is rocking back and forth.
Yeah, they have like whole systems so that you don't like catch your boat on fire. It's like I was looking all this stuff up. It's really interesting that the way that they did cook on boats back in the day, but you had to have like a bunch of like fire safe like bricks and stuff around, so you're not like so your boat doesn't catch on fire, which apparently did still happen sometimes.
And Andrea, since we're talking to you right now, the fact that you come from a Chinese background, I'm curious, like a lot of the tropes that are in fantasy when it comes to food, a lot of it comes from a European background. So I'm wondering what it was like for you coming from, you know, a Chinese family, or like your mom's side is Chinese, how that affected your perspectives on fantasy in general, and like if that made you notice the food in a more glaring way.
I mean, right, like they're not going to be eating a bunch of bread and cheese. Like first off, like cheese is probably not a big thing in Asian culture, so that's like and then bread, it's more, they do more steamed bread, so I had a lot of that. So I just kind of based a lot of it on like the food that I grew up with, or that I've been like become a little bit more familiar with. I know like one of the interesting things about Chinese cooking is that people tend to think of Chinese cooking as just like Cantonese, because that's what a lot of the Chinese restaurants in the U.S. are. They're mostly Cantonese flavors. But if you go to China, or if you go to a place that has like more regional foods, like it's a huge country. There's like so many different kinds of food there. There's Cantonese food, but there's like Hunan, there's like Sichuan, there's like all of these different flavors. So that was like one thing that I wanted to kind of incorporate into my book, is that you're not going to have the same flavors everywhere you go. Like every place has their own like specialties that they like to cook, like their own comfort foods, which I think is like really important. And like these are the things that, you know, the characters like think about, like what they grew up with. Like my main character Jovis, like his mom like made dumplings, and she was a cook as a living, so like he would help her out, and he thinks about that a lot. And he eats a lot of street food, because that's like one of the things that I like to do a lot when I travel too, is like what do all these little like food stalls what are they cooking, what are they giving to you? But yeah, I feel like a lot of the tropes that you see in fantasy as far as food goes are very like kind of Western European, like very, but even if you read like about like Western European food, it wasn't just all like stews and bread and cheese. So, but I feel like it's kind of I feel like what happens is that people absorb these ideas from the stuff that they read as a kid, and then that becomes the thing that they write. Like when I was growing up, like all the stuff that I read was Western European, like white people fantasy. That was like the first thing I started writing. And then, yes, they ate stew and bread and cheese and dried meat, because that was like what I had. I'm like, this is what fantasy is. So I feel like nowadays there's like less of an excuse for that, right? Because hopefully you're reading widely and you're getting like, oh, hey, there are like all these other cultures out there, and they're all eating different things. So hopefully we'll see a little bit less of just like the bread, cheese, dried meat, and stew.
Actually, this is a very good jumping off point. First, I want to say like during this whole conversation, I've just been thinking in the back of my head, are there any good examples of like fermentation in fantasy? Because I would just love to see more like fermented stuff, you know, when it comes to traveling long distances, all that kind of thing. It's like fermentation is the best way to preserve things that you want to eat like 10 weeks later, you know, not some some damn raw meat or something like that, you know?
Yeah.
But Tom, you mentioned earlier how when you go to a new country, the first thing that you want to do is like go to visit some local restaurants and kind of get a feeling for what the culinary and cultural history of that place is like. And Andrea, you hit on that perfectly. It's like if all of Europe were just boiled down into stews and bread and cheese, then Europe would be the most boring place ever. But you go to Europe and it's like country to country, town to town, you know, just within France, just within Germany, just within different parts of Scandinavia. It's like all these different places have local delicacies. They have different ways of preparing something. They have different names for dishes that somewhere else might be almost exactly the same, but the name is different. And so I think it's really wonderful and interesting and engaging when an author takes that little bit of extra effort to give something a bit more specificity, give it a bit more detail and richness that brings you just like a little bit deeper into the world and the culture and the characters and all of that. And since we're on,
and also as Andrea mentioned,
ahead,
show how characters react to it. If they're hopping from island to island, they're going to be trying things they haven't before.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think white people fantasy is my new favorite term, which I have to steal. But it's such a good point. You know, we've all been talking about how bored we are with stews and bread and cheese. And there's so much more out there. It's just a good way for the reader to empathize with these characters and taste what they taste, see what they see, smell all the scents as well.
Yeah,
it just makes things more interesting to read.
And Tom, on that point, what would your hopes be for the future of food and fantasy? What would you like to see?
Do you know what? I'd really love to see a book about a fantasy pizza place. And I want all the heroes, all the tropey heroes will come in, they'll order pineapple on their dragon pizza. And yeah, maybe we'll just follow the delivery person. That'd be such a cool book to read.
I'm just imagining how horrible it would be to deliver. Just like delivering pizza on horseback would be a pain in the ass.
Yeah.
Sounds like a good opportunity for Angela with her fake Italians.
Oh yeah, my pizza. Well, I also have a story about eating dragons too, but
dragon meat.
Yeah. I don't know that they have access to pineapples though. That would be the only thing with that.
The one thing in the way.
I don't know. Maybe they have like a really comprehensive import-export maybe kind of thing going on.
Then they could all give each other a hard time about having pineapples on their pizza.
Does anyone else want to jump in on the notion of like what they hope to see in the future of fantastical food?
Well, I just would like to see more people putting like their own experiences into the stories that they're writing. More writers like writing about, you know, food that they've known and they've eaten or they've experienced in like, you know, their childhood or their, you know, travels or whatever, just treating it more as less as a trope, you know, which is what we're talking about with what Andrea was saying with, you know, white people fantasy. And like when you're writing, not everything has to be the trope that you think of as like medieval fantasy. Like you can put yourself in the book and put the food in the book as a real thing instead of just as sort of set dressing that you kind of move around and that signals, oh, we're reading fantasy now. This is because fantasy is so diverse. It's got room for everything. So
yeah, I agree. Krystle?
Yeah, I agree with Angela, making it personal and making it, you know, bringing your own awakening into it. And, you know, the regionality of food is so interesting, but also the seasonality of food, like what even you on the equator, there's still seasons where certain things are available, I'd imagine, where during the rainy season you get certain things, and then as you move away from the equator, then we have to deal with winter and summer, and just playing with that, the world building isn't just the time period, it's also the weather you have and the food you have and how those two things interact with each other. So yeah, definitely I'd love to see people lean into their personal experience and think outside of the echo chamber, and just bring it to life in a way that they can relate to, because if they can relate to it, then it makes it more fun, and then readers can feel that when you're enjoying yourself.
Yeah. And Andrea, do you want to add some final thoughts to that notion?
I would love to see a fantasy cookbook, just like recipes from the different novels of like food that sounded really good.
There is. Yeah. There's a lady who she's done cookbooks for Game of Thrones, for World of Warcraft, and a bunch of different things. And then I don't know if it was you, Tom, who mentioned that there was a Redwall cookbook as well. Right? You mentioned that to me?
We have a Redwall cookbook.
Oh my God.
Clearly I'm behind. I need to get into some of that.
My husband bought me there's a D&D cookbook too. It's like,
oh, cool.
There is.
Yes.
Yeah, I can't wait for that one.
I haven't cooked anything out of it, but my husband bought it for me. Anyway, I think I got it from my birthday.
You got to make some stuff in there and send us pictures.
I do. Yeah. I do. I can make some stew.
Actually, I would really love to try dandelion cordial, actually.
Yeah. Like the Redwall stuff is like they're trying to, it's like the strawberry. They make like a strawberry, was it a cordial? But it's, it's like, we'll kind of pretend this. We'll make a smoothie. We'll call it, for kids, we'll call it a cordial. But you were like, they had like dumplings and like, baked pears and stuff like that. And so my kids thought it was pretty cool.
Amazing. And I'm going to go through each of you one by one, and I want you to tell me your essential kitchen tools or appliances. Anywhere from like 3 to 5 things that are really important to you when it comes to the kitchen and cooking. So we'll start with you, Andrea.
Okay, so I really love my Instant Pot. I got that a while ago. It's pretty great. A really, really sharp chef's knife. That's like super important to me. I always hate when I go to an Airbnb and like all the knives are dull. Third thing is probably a big stock pot. I really like having a big stock pot.
Nice. And what about you, Krystle?
Yeah, I'm definitely with Andrea on the big pots. Totally lost my train of thought. A cast iron pan is indispensable. I couldn't live without my cast iron frying pan, and my stand mixer, because that's a lot of elbow grease and nobody's got time for that anymore. But having a stand mixer to do my own bread and stuff once in a while is bread is fun, people. Just think outside of the plain old bread box, because there's a lot of really cool stuff out there. Yeah, that's probably my indispensable stuff.
Angela, what are your indispensable appliances or tools?
Well, like everybody else, I like a good chef's knife, so that's probably my number one, and a cast iron pan, because that's the only skillets I use now are cast iron. I don't know. It's kind of coming down to like, I'm finicky about spatulas for some reason. I don't know, like certain spatulas just flip things and stir better than other ones. Yeah, but I also do use a lot of like 13. Well, actually, if you could get like a 14 by 11, I think you can get like a 14 by 11 casserole pan. I do a lot of big baking, and I don't use many small things. I use a lot of big pans. So that's my
big baking.
And Tom, big bacon.
Yeah, I have used the same spatula for 15 years, and I shall be using it 15 more after that. Don't muck around when it comes to spatulas. You find one that's good, you keep it. Also, a pan that you can do the perfect fried eggs in, or scrambled eggs. Egg pan. Doesn't matter how big it is, as long as you're comfortable using it. It doesn't have to be cast iron. Just your all-purpose. Absolute gold dust in the kitchen.
Yeah, and I'm on the same page as pretty much everyone. Like chef's knife, super important. Cast iron pans. My wife and I actually we found this butcher shop that sells all different sizes of cast iron. So we have 3 sizes of cast iron pans. One of them is like baby sized, so it's about like that big, and we use that for stuff for my son. As well as these like little cast iron pots that we can make stuff for him too. I think something that I use pretty much every day is a mortar and pestle. And I basically just like, if I'm making a soup or if I'm doing scrambled eggs or something, I'll just like throw in a bit of salt, a little bit of cumin and some garlic and just crush that up and mix it into whatever I'm cooking. So that's really essential for me. And then because I like a good sharp knife, and screw the Airbnbs who don't take care of their utensils. I love, always got to have like a good whetstone around somewhere where I could just like quickly sharpen a knife. Love to have a nice whetstone. It's also kind of like a good meditative practice to just like sharpen some knives.
Yeah.
Or if you just want to be really sort of imposing.
Like
aggressive.
A barbarian just like sharpening his knives like this. And then we're gonna go through everyone again, and if you can describe in as much detail as your author minds can muster the best meal that you've ever had. And Krystle, we'll start with you.
That's a really hard question. I think the best thing that I think I've ever made was can we skip me? I gotta think about it.
Who else wants to jump? It doesn't necessarily have to be.
Yeah.
It doesn't necessarily have to be something you've made, but something you've eaten in general as well.
Oh, that's even worse.
Does anyone have something in mind already?
I can jump in.
Andrea, go for it.
A couple years ago, I was in Japan with my husband, and there was a couple of different things that go into this that made it the best meal. And like, first off, it was like, I was there with my husband. We didn't have any kids yet. So that was like pretty great. And, we went, out to ramen, and if you've ever had ramen in Japan, the way that they do it is a little bit different than the way they do it here. They have like a little machine where you punch in all the stuff that you want to get in your ramen. We had no idea what we were doing. So we were like, we got to the front of the line. They're like, where's your little thing so they had to like lead us back to the machine. And we eventually figured it out and like punched in all the things that we wanted into our ramen. And then went and like sat at a little booth because it was Ichiran. So if you've ever been to Ichiran, you go to like a little booth that's like all closed off, and you can like, lift the separator between you and the person you're eating with. But it's very like, they just want you to focus on the food. So we had our ramen, and it was wonderful and perfect. And I think about that meal a lot. So it wasn't just that the food was good, but we had to work for it a little bit.
Actually, the best meal I ever had was also in Japan. Andrea, the little dividers. My wife and I had a similar situation, but we didn't know the dividers go down, so we just like ate 90%,
like by yourself.
90% of our meals just like in this booth, and then I just like I put my hand on it to go like tell my wife like this is amazing, and I just like shut it down by accident. I was like, oh shit, like. But similarly to you, in Tokyo, there's a market called Tsukiji, and it's like a fish market where they do like open air tuna auctions and things like that.
Yeah, we went there. Yeah,
so good. But my wife and I decided, okay, we have one morning, and we went there at 6:30 a.m. To the market, and it was pouring rain, and we're just like, screw it, we're gonna go check this out. And we're going through the maze of this market because they have all kinds of different areas, but they have a lot of little restaurants and shops that are just kind of clustered in these crazy mazes of alleyways and stuff. And we found this one place and we were like, okay, this looks good. And we sat down on the stool and ordered, and I had udon noodle with boiled eel. And it was like the most delicious breakfast. It was so fitting for the context too. It was raining, it was really cold. And just to have this like steaming bowl of udon noodles with eel was freaking incredible. And yeah, sometimes when it's like raining, I'll just think back on that meal and just remember that little like warm feeling that I had going down my stomach, just like slurping up udon noodles. Yeah. All right. Anyone else want to share some amazing meals?
I don't know. Like, so the food wasn't objectively amazing, I guess, but this is more of an emotional kind of a thing. Because right after I had my first child in the hospital, and you don't normally think of like hospital food as being like your best meal ever, but I had just given birth and it was really hard it was an overnight kind of thing. And then everything was okay. And we were settling down and they gave me like this cream of wheat it was hot and the nurse came in and she decided she was going to make me like crayon apple juice. They didn't have like it together. So she mixed it for me, and she fixed the cream of wheat, and she gave it to me. And I have just, cream of wheat doesn't really taste that good after that, but that cream of wheat was like the best thing that I had ever eaten. And with all my kids, right after I had them, I didn't eat cream of wheat again, but I would have the, in those little hospital cups that they bring you a juice, I would like put together they usually had cranberry and apple. So I would always, that was like after my celebratory drink was the crayon apple juice. So that's my favorite meal.
That's beautiful. And Krystle, do you have something in mind already?
I've come up with something. I remember when we went to Europe, I guess about 4 years ago now. I think the most memorable thing we had was waffles in Belgium. And there's a specific kind of waffle called Liège waffles. And they're not like pancakes. They're made like brioche bread dough, like so really eggy and with yeast in them. And then they fold in pearl sugar, and then they put that in the waffle iron, and the sugar melts to like a caramel. So you'll get little pops of caramel in through this amazing yeasted waffle. And that experience was pretty cool. And we were downtown in Liège, and they had the big cathedral where that statue of sexy Lucifer is. And it was just kind of walking through the markets and eating those waffles, and then surrounded by all that architecture was really memorable. That stands out to me of all the things that we ate.
That sounds very magical. And yeah, Belgian waffles.
Yeah.
That's another thing that's like very unique to each different region of Belgium. It's not like you're going to find the same thing everywhere.
And they're nothing like the Belgian waffles we serve here.
No. That is like an American waffle that's just big and it's like topped with whatever.
It's just pancake batter in a fancy pan.
Yeah, exactly. And Tom, do you have a meal that you'd like to describe to us?
Jeez, I have so many. I'm not going to say anything that I cooked. So I'm going to go to Belgium as well. I don't know where you went, Krystle, but have you ever been to Bruges?
No, we didn't make it that far west. We were mostly in Liège, and then we went down. But I'm excited for the story, though.
Okay. Yeah, well, I mean, Belgium, you pretty know what you're going to get. You're going to get Flemish beef stew, frites, mussels, or waffles. That's pretty much it, and that's all you need. There's a van in the main square of Bruges, just does frites, and I remember just there. It was a rainy day. I had the frites with Flemish beef stew on top, And you know when in movies they sort of they focus on the character, the camera zones in and they move backwards. You get that like tunnel effect.
Yeah.
I swear that's what happened to me when I was eating this thing. And there's a photo somewhere of me looking just very disheveled, very wide-eyed, just sat down on a really wet step, eating this bowl of chips. And oh man, just so
Bruges
so,
is really
so
beautiful too.
Yeah, it's a really, really nice city. And
Yeah.
the other thing that really amazed me was everywhere you go, every beer you have, each individual beer has its own glass, which is so amazing. So almost unnecessary, but so cool.
It's just a matter of having the right temperature every single time.
Damn right.
It's like, don't mess around with that, man. And every time I think of Bruges, I just get pulled back into the movie with Colin Farrell. So
yeah, in Bruges.
So good.
Excellent movie.
Amazing movie.
That's a good one.
To close out, we'll start with Angela. If you could give a recommendation for a food documentary, a cookbook, anything, or even like a book that has really good examples of food, if you want to offer something up to the viewers and listeners.
Oh, geez. Food documentary. That's, I used to spend a lot of time watching Food Network, like just kind of compulsively, but I haven't done that very much lately. I know. The books, Lori Colwin's books, and she was a writer, and these have been around for quite a while, but I reread them a lot. And she wrote 2 books, and one of them's called Home Cooking. And I think the other one's just like more home cooking, but she had these the recipes and these little stories and essays, with them together. And I make her gingerbread recipe every year during the holidays, because it's excellent. It's really good, but she's really funny too. And so that's my recommendation. Those are my favorites. I think that mine are all marked up and wrecked, and the covers are kind of falling off. So,
Krystle, do you have any recommendations?
I think you know who I'm going to say. Definitely
Tony.
Anthony Bourdain. Yeah. And specifically Parts Unknown. The show that he ran for CNN is an amazing love letter to how food and culture combine to make something unique no matter where you go. And and how it builds, even like him visiting families in certain areas and watching him go through the different hierarchies of food in an area was just kind of, that probably really started me on my big passion. And all of his stuff is great. He's amazing. He was amazing. And just, yeah. And then the flip side of that is Michael Pollan, who Angela mentioned. He's an investigative journalist, and so he comes from it almost the opposite direction. Like Anthony Bourdain went to it for the experience, and then Michael Pollan came to it through the science of food. And so he has something on Netflix too called Cooked, and it's interesting how the two people overlap, but they're completely opposite in their approach, where Anthony Bourdain's so irreverent and kind of a bad boy, and Michael Pollan is so quietly intellectual, but his insight into food is just amazing. So definitely those two circles are kind of where, right dead in the center, that's where I am in my interests. So yeah, the
Venn diagram of Krystle's food world.
Yeah, exactly. Michael Pollan and then Anthony Bourdain.
But yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. Like Anthony Bourdain, if anyone wants like a good insight in what the cooking world is like, his book Kitchen Confidential is hilarious, and it's also really
That one's good.
A really raw, evocative writing style that I love.
Yeah.
And then Michael Pollan, just a side note, Michael Pollan also writes a lot of, recently he's started getting into the world of sort of like psychedelics and drugs, and his books on that.
Yeah, I'm reading that right now, actually.
Yeah. It's like how to
change your mind.
How your mind works
how to change your mind.
on drugs.
Yeah.
I am right now reading How to Change Your Mind.
I have it. Where is it?
That one too, yeah.
That was good.
Yeah. He's really good. He can write about anything, and he's just so inherently interesting. Oh, my husband knows where it is. So yeah, he writes about quitting coffee, and it's interesting. Like, he's just so. And then also there's
I really like that essay.
Mescaline. Yeah, that was a good book.
Yeah, he's just such an engaging writer, and on like the totally opposite end of the spectrum of anything like Anthony Bourdain or Michael Pollan, if you just want something that's hilarious and really fun and just kind of like something to unwind to, there's this Japanese cooking show called Cooking with Dog, and it's so fun because it's this like middle-aged Japanese woman who doesn't speak at all during the entire show, but she has her pet poodle in the kitchen with her, and the poodle narrates the whole show. So the poodle is just like chilling with her while she cooks, and she makes amazing food. But it's so
might have to look that one up.
It's so fun and it's beautiful, and it's just like the simple magic of just like putting a voiceover on a dog and it working perfectly. So yeah. Andrea, do you wanna get in on this and give some recommendations for documentaries or shows or anything?
Sure. I mean, recently I've been really into watching on BuzzFeed, Your Dish is Granted. It's on YouTube. It's really fun where basically the host of the show has like a friend or a family member or just somebody that they know peripherally tell them what they want him to make for them. And he's got 24 hours and no budget to put together the dish of their dreams, basically. So that's really fun.
That sounds awesome. Tom, do you have any recommendations?
So documentary-wise, Jiro Dreams of Sushi, the movie, it's just pure mindfulness. It's a pretty masterful film, and it's so satisfying. This guy is just this ancient crafter of sushi, and you can just watch that film on repeat, I swear. Just to see someone so effortlessly practice and learn it at something. I've watched that film quite a few times. Book-wise, I've got two. I got my most used cookbook, and I have my favorite. My most used is Nigella Lawson. She did a book called Kitchen. I think the takeaway recipe from that is the Marmite spaghetti. Cannot wait to try that with my daughter. My favorite cookbook was the Frasier tie-in one. They did it was called Cafe Nervosa, the Connoisseur's Cookbook. And it's such an amazing tie-in. It's got quotes from the show.
That's a deep cut, man. I haven't heard about Frasier in ages.
It's seriously a thing, and now it'll set you back about 33 quid on eBay. And I got mine for a lot cheaper than that. But yeah, if you ever find a copy, it's really fun.
Cool. Well, thank you all so much for joining me and chatting about food and fantasy and food in all its various aspects. Angela, Krystle, Andrea, Tom, you guys are great, and it was nice to hear your perspectives. If we'll start with Angela, if you could tell viewers, listeners, where they can find your work, where they can find you on social media.
My website is just angelaboord.com, or you can find me on Twitter, Angela Boord, at Angela Boord on Twitter as well. And I am on Goodreads. I try to review some books, but I'm not, I don't keep up real well sometimes. So I'm Angela Boord there too.
And that's Boord, Boord.
Right.
As well. And Krystle, where can viewers, listeners find you?
Mostly I'm on Twitter, just at Krystle Matar. I also have a website that I do not update, just crystlematar.com. I'm also on Goodreads, but I'm reading Michael Pollan right now, so there's not much there. But yeah, mostly I'm on Twitter. Technically, I'm on hiatus now, just to try to finish my book, but I still lurk. So if people need to reach out to me, I'm absolutely available on Twitter.
Cool. And Andrea, where can people find you and your work?
Like Krystle, I have a website, AndreaGStewart.com, but I do not update it either. I try. So mostly I'm active on Twitter at Andrea G. Stewart as well there.
Awesome. And Tom, where can people find you?
Where she posts the most amazing pictures of her cats.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, Andrew.
He wears costumes. He's great.
And Tom, where can people find you and your beard?
You can find me on Twitter as Tom Bookbeard. That's at Tom4T, TOMFORTEA. If you're really into beards, I post on Jeff's beard board, JEFF, as Fishfinger Rusty. Full of beards.
The beard started that, not Tom. It's like the beard joined the forum before he even became a human.
Yeah.
Dragged him along.
The sentient beard.
Just a little baby. It's like, come on, man.
Tom is just along for the ride, kicking and screaming.
Yeah.
Oh, man. Well, thank you all so much for taking part in this panel, and I really appreciate you being here.
Thanks very much.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good night.